Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Captain Billy's Garage. Today, we're working on the parking brake system of my 67 Mustang. So we've got some new parking brake cables that I got off Amazon, some of the old parking brake system and the hardware associated, and I've got a couple of the books out that show us where all the fasteners go, torque specs and things like that for the original Mustang setup. So we're going to be doing kind of a hybrid version of using some old and some new. So come along with me and we'll take you through the process. So here, just coming in a little bit closer, you can see these new parking brake cables in the bag here. So when I took the car apart, I labeled everything as I took it out. So these are all of the parking brake cable related assembly hardware and screws. This is the original parking brake handle in the car. We'll go through and restore that, but we're not going to do that today. This is one of the vent releases. This is the part outside the car. And then over here I've got these books that take us through where the cables come through the firewall, where the mounting is for each of the pieces, up underneath the car, how it mounts into the bracket underneath. We'll get into there and I'll show you that as well. And then this one as well, this shows actually all of the part numbers for each of the different brake systems and things like that. And these are a couple of old restoration books that I have. All right, coming to the interior of the car, let's look at where that original parking brake assembly mounts to the car. So this is the firewall mount here. We're going to have to do a little modification to our bracket because I got carried away in prep for this car. This is the hole where the assembly actually goes through the floor and outside of the firewall. And then up here, these are the two mounting points where the parking brake handle mounts to the dash. So we've got our parking brake handle assembly and our cable. So we've got to get all this passed through this hole here. Should all go through. There we go. All right, then we got our seal. Okay. Just feed all that through there. Let's see how all this tucks up right in here, up to there. So I'll set a top bolt in to hold it up. All right, I'll get one set down here in the foot. My bolts are too short. Just too short. All right, let me get some longer bolts. We'll be right back. Okay, and I'm back. Had to make these. So now let's see if we can get this mounted up on the firewall. A little bit loose. Let's see if we can get our second bolt in. Not quite lining up. Let's see. Okay. So it looks like we've got a little bit of an interference issue with our hydraulic clutch. Well, I think what I can do is flip the bolt around on the hydraulic clutch, and that will fix that. Okay, so if you've never used a parking brake like this before, the way they work is you just pull it straight back and it ratchets, and then to release it, you rotate it, and that takes it out of the ratchet pulls itself back in. Or you push it back in. I'll figure out a solution for this later. Okay, but now we've got this mounted to the car. So now let's get underneath and hook up the other end of that cable. All right, back up under the car here. I brought our brackets down with us. So we've got this bracket here. It's gonna mount right here. So get that put in. So this tool that I'm using is a universal bit driver, so it's a multi-tool. And it just has several different standard size bit drives on it, or socket drives on it, but it's a handheld screwdriver. I think I got this at Home Depot. And these screws are just a self-tapping type. No, it was a self-tapping type. And this is what Ford used from the factory. I had slowly been going through and replacing all these with riv-nuts, but I couldn't get the riv-nut tool in here to do these because they have to thread in from this side, and there wasn't enough room to fit it in here, so I just left the factory style. And we'll go through and clean up and restore this bracket too before we're done with the car. This is just so we can get the parking brake cables run and situated, and then we'll come back through and pull all this off. So we got that bracket snugged up in there nice and tight. So next we have this here, which slips into this, and we've got to fish it through the holes here. And I kept a clip for this one taped to it. It looks like I failed to do that for the other side. So we're gonna have to find what I did with that. Oh goodness. All right, so just take that, fish it through the hole just like that. This wave washer actually goes on this side, and then there's another clip. I think I put that bracket in upside down. Can it even mount upside down? But it definitely looks like it's the wrong angle, doesn't it? All right, yeah, that looks like it lines up a whole lot better with the hole coming through the firewall. So let's get it slipped on there. All right, that's better. Put that through our hole there. Yep, that lines up a lot better. Okay. All right, so these little spring clips go on the back side of this, and they kind of capture this bushing or piece between these panels. So like that, and then you just tap them in. There it goes. All right, so this is the end, or where it ends for our stock parking brake assembly. So we're going to reuse all of this, and then I'll bring you guys up here, and you can see how it ties into this bracket up here. All right, so this is that little L-shaped bracket that I was showing you earlier. And it goes through this hole here. just like that. Okay, and then when it pulls on it, it's going to pull it up into the car that way. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run our parking brake cable system from our parking brake calipers back up to this, and we may have to change the mounting hole location to get enough throw on it, but this is where the original one tied in. And it tied the two halves of the car together. It was a bit of a different system. I'll get a picture of the book and insert it here with how this ran. But we're gonna have to run it a bit different because these calipers require a little bit more pull, and it's more than the factory system can handle. I think there's also clearance issues with our drive shaft and a few other things that we would run into. So let's get our parking brake cables out and get them hooked up to the calipers and run them up here and just see what we're dealing with and where we can find places to mount everything. Here's our parking brake cables laid out. You can see just how long they are now. And they have these ends on them. A jam nut and a stepped collar. That's going to mount into the parking brake caliper itself. And that is right here. So they'll slip through this little notch right here, and then we'll come around to the back side and I'll show you how it connects to the actual arm that activates the caliper. Okay, so coming to the back side of the caliper, this is where that step notch in the cables is going to go. And then the end of the cable end itself is going to go into this. And then what it does is it just pulls these together. So we're going to round our cable to that, up to this, get that set, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to get it routed from here around the frame all the way up to our bracket up there. I don't know if you can see it. And we got to do that for both sides. The driver's side's fairly easy. The passenger side, we've got to contend with the drive shaft and get it from the other side of the car to this side of the car. So let's finagle with it for a bit and see if we can figure it out. Okay, now that we've got our cables sorted, let's put them back in. All right, nice and tight. So now we've got to figure out how we want to route these cables up to the front. All right, after messing around with it for a minute, this is what I settled on. So running the cable out and just behind the control arm here. And then we're going to tuck it up in the frame rail gap there. And then there was a spot here just big enough to run it underneath the frame rail and under the floor, or between the floor and the frame rail. Have it come out right here. All right, and I've done something similar to the other side, except the gap on the floor here on the other side wasn't big enough, so I'm going to take a hammer and a piece of wood and knock the floor up right there just a little bit so that I can snake the cable through. So we're going to take a piece of wood to help protect the floor some from the hammer. We're going to hit it on both sides. You can see how that gap is opening up just a little bit. Hit it again. There we go. All right.
see we've got enough room here to pass the cable through. So let's do that. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to take the cable and we're going to run along this torque tube brace. I don't have to move the camera again, but yeah, we're going to come right through here and get that mounted. Okay, so we're going to run our cable. Along this bottom edge here, and then we need to cross it over the top to line up with our other cable as well. So go ahead and fish it through that. And then we'll get some zip ties and hold all this in place for right now. You can see now I've got both my cables on this side of the car. We've got our bracket here that we're going to hook to. So after I get all the routing finalized and we know our exact length, then we're going to take our mounting bracket, which I left up top, and find a spot to line up and drill holes somewhere in this to mount that with, and then run our cable up to our bracket here. I've just taken a zip tie and just kind of pulled these up and out of place for the moment. We've set our clevis in here, just kind of eyeballed it with the hole. What I don't know is if this motion ratio of all of this is going to be enough to pull those calipers tight. So that'll take some adjustment, and we may have to like drill a different hole depending on how that comes out. All right, then we've got our bracket here. And now we need to find a good solid spot in the floor to mount this, and we need enough open cable to get from this is where the cable is actually going to pinch in. So we need enough open cable to get from the floor, from these brackets, over to here without binding up too much. So we probably want to move it back some. Maybe right in there somewhere. Now the other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this is that this free space right here is going to be tension. So whatever is pulling here is also going to be pulling here. So we need to consider what we've got on the other side of this floor, as well as the fasteners that we're going to be mounting it with. Because if this isn't strong enough to handle the pull force, it'll pull out of the floor or stretch the holes, get loose, and then fall out over time. Unfortunately, I might be able to from the back, but the seat pan is right on the other side of this, on the interior of the car, so we don't have access to the back side of this piece except through these holes here. It would have been really awesome. There's a weld seam right here where that welds to the floor here, and then there's another one back here. It would have been really awesome to line up on that, but that's not going to work. There'd be too much open cable there. Well, maybe. I mean, it would just be... Nope. So we're going to have to go somewhere out here in the middle. To get the alignment that we want on all of this. To make this work. And we want enough cable there that the angle where it comes out of these holes is enough that it's not dragging through these holes. It might rub a little bit, but if it's too much over time, it'll wear these out. It could chafe the cable, could cause the cable to fray and break. So we got to make sure that there's enough distance between them that we're not running into that as an issue also. So we want a nice straight line of sight shot on this. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling back on that on our cable from inside. And then I've just zip tied it to this to keep everything in line. We want nice, like a co-linear pull. When we pull this in, we can see this hole's gonna move. It moves in an arc because it's on a pivot. So it's gonna shift it slightly to the driver's side as it pulls. About half an inch or so. So just something else to keep in mind. All right. So that's probably about what we're looking at for our setup here. Take my scribe here. And we'll mark our first hole. Mark this one actually. Okay. We'll take our makeshift hammer. Put a nice dent. I have a real hammer here, so why don't I just use it? Well, I don't know. Okay. That marked. Drilled it. So for the riv-nuts, I'm using their 1/4 20 riv-nuts. So this is the riv-nut. And you want to, if you look, you'll see the little knurling on it, those little ridges. So the hole you're drilling is just small enough that it presses kind of onto those. And then those bite into the metal on both sides so that it doesn't spin. So you gotta use the right size drill bit. So I ordered this one specific just for mounting these. I just got it off McMaster. And we've just drilled this fresh metal. So what I'm going to do is put a little paint on the riv-nut. To help protect it from corrosion. I'm going to run it up into the hole wet, and that is going to help just seal that hole as well. There we go. And then just give it a squeeze and adjust it in. Squeeze it until it snugs right up. All right. So this is important. I'm blind fitting these because I don't have a template. So to get around it, I'll thread it in there. And then we'll line up on our bracket. So by putting the one bolt in, and when we go and we mark our second hole, should get us really close to where we want to be. And then of course always center punch when you want it to stay where it's supposed to. That was a nice good hit. So we get a nice good center punch there. And I'm gonna go get a smaller drill bit to start this hole with. So, a pilot drill is always a good idea. All right, give it a quick bit of paint. Wrestle it into the hole. And lock it down. Nice and tight. Go. Alignment looks great. Okay. So now we've got our adjusters. So I'm just assuming there's going to be a lot of stretch in this cable, so I'm trying to run it back the adjusters to where I've got maximum adjustment to tighten them up with. Okay. So now I've got our cables like that. We know where these are going. So these are hollow in here, and they're hollow up to about here. So that's where our sheathing is going to end. So now that we've got everything laid out where it's going to go, it's oriented, everything's clamped up, I've got enough slack. All right, let me get some tape, and we'll mark these where they need to be cut, and then we'll get it cut. All right, got the cables out, got them clamped into the vise here in my soft jaws, and I've put them just flush on it. The idea behind that is that I want to cut these very flat and very flush, so I can use the soft jaws as a guide. Okay, apologies for that. Ran out of memory. So I didn't realize it until after I cut it, but I've already got these cut off. They're to length. I've cleaned them up. So now they're ready to go back into the car. This clevis end has these 4 jam nuts or grub screws. And the cables are going to pass through these holes, and then these are going to squeeze down on them and clamp them in place and keep them from moving. So I need to go get some Allen wrenches so I can back these off, and we can feed our cables through. So I'm going to just take everything, pull it tight. And then we're just going to put some pressure on it. So these, you're going to want to put some Loctite on them. I don't have anything on it right now because I'm going to pull these cables out and grease them before this is permanent. Our alignment on everything looks really good. It all moves, which is awesome. So we're going to pull the slack out of these by adjusting this nut up. So the next thing that we've got to do is we've got all this extra cable length. So we've got to mark the cable, which Wish I had a Sharpie, but I lost it. There it is, found it. So we're gonna leave a little bit on these, so we need to be able to pass it through. So I'm gonna leave a couple inches. So let's go right there. And same on this side. Okay, so now we got these marked, so this is where we'll cut them off. And before we cut them off, we're going to go through and attempt to put some solder in here to keep the strands from fraying apart. So I'll show you guys how we're going to do that. But I'm going to crack all these nuts loose and pull the cables out.
Clean this up with some flux and heat it up, and then flux it and then heat it up. That should drive all the grease out of it. And then we'll take some solder and fill that in. And that should keep the strands from popping apart when we go to cut it. All right, flux it again. We'll get our solder. Let's see if we do this. Okay. It appears to have worked beautifully. All right, now I've got a set of cable cutters. These are actually mountain bike brake cable cutters, but we're gonna see if they'll cut through this. I think they should. All right, we're just gonna cut right through the middle of our solder. So looking in on the end of it here, focus on that. Ooh, it's hot. You see it's got the strands all encapsulated now, and they're not trying to come apart. So, set that one down and do the other one. Okay, and then we're going to grease these cables. So when we go to put them back in, we're going to slide them through some grease. And that will just help ensure that we've got a nice long service life out of these, and hopefully they don't wear anything out. So remember, after I cut these, they are different lengths now. So you gotta make sure to grab the right one. All right, I'm gonna feed the first few inches of this through. So that way we've got clean cable to grab a hold of. For grease, I have this marine grade grease. Mostly I'm using it because it's what I have, but it's also very water resistant. So if water ever gets into the cable sheathing, it'll keep everything from rusting up and rotting out, so that we always have good brakes. So I'm just going to take it and squeeze them into a paper towel. Like so. And then we're just going to take it and run the cable through it as we push it in. Alright, and then we'll want to go through and clean all this up as well, because grease gets everywhere. All right. Just take a paper towel. I'm gonna clean up all this excess.
this all put back together. So we'll run this adjuster all the way out. And we've got these all the way in. So we're just going to try and pull these as finger tight as we can. And we've got all the adjustment. Okay. Crank down on these, crush these little set screws. All right, so those are nice and tight in there. They shouldn't back out. I feel like you can just see where I started the grease, and you see why I started and stopped it where I did. It just comes out the end of the cable here, which is perfect. All right, so now we'll run our adjuster up a little bit. So we'll adjust this up a fair bit further, I'm sure. And then we'll pull the brake tight in the car and check the tension between these two. And we want them to be very similar, so it's balanced. And to adjust that, we'll then come in here and adjust these to even the tension out between these two cables to account for the difference in these.
Well, thanks for joining me on getting another project completed on the Mustang, getting it one step closer to being back on the road again. So I got our big list out. Got to check one more thing off of it, get the parking brakes installed. Up next, we're going to braze the front cowling right here. So stay tuned for that. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing, leaving me a comment below. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't like. Your comments and feedback help me create better content for this channel and bring you the information that you want to see. So, thanks for joining me, and until next time, enjoy the drive.